that recording. So welcome everybody. My name is Kennedy. I am a graduate student at the University of Texas at El Paso. I recently certified in rehabilitation counseling, and with that, this year I just got a few disclaimers before we begin. Today we're going to be talking about crisis and trauma counseling. Now, despite me being a student, there's a lot of professionals in here within this group, and those that are around that are definitely knowledgeable. Yes, you will be called out. I will be asking you to get off mic to talk. And with that too, I do have several disclaimers I want to go through real quick. So let me make sure my screen is being shared and we will get started. So first and foremost, this group is not going to guarantee you that you pass a CRC examination. That is ultimately up to you, and you are responsible for your own commitment and time to study.
I think everybody should be able to hear me. I'm on mic. With that, this group is designed for professionals like you and me to help one another grasp better knowledge of the rehabilitation work and to collaborate together to build our expertise towards becoming a CRC certified. Also, all materials and lectures information are not funded or sponsored in part by myself or any of the agencies themselves. You are required to pay for your own textbooks and materials. Again, we study to that red book, but it's up to you whether or not you want to purchase it. With that, this group does not present any major organizations, companies, schools, or institutions, nor will it solicit any particular government or non-government interests. Everything contributed to this group is solely voluntary and has zero mandates. However, the more you contribute, the better we can help others earn their credentials. Does anybody have any questions before we begin?
Nope.
Nope. All righty. So luckily for here, let me make sure this works. This was recorded already. It's a pre-recording, and I'll go into details, but it's a really good presentation. This focuses more on the crisis side, but if you're following with the red book, there's a lot more to this when we talk about the counseling and interventions. So this presentation here focuses more on the crisis itself, but I encourage you, please read the book about some of the more multiple intervention procedures. Let me know if you can hear the sound.
The objectives of crisis intervention consist of understanding risk assessment and safety planning, understanding polytrauma injury.
I don't think I did. Hold on. Yeah, were you able to hear the sound voice going? Okay, great. So we'll just keep going. Thank you.
Define effective rehabilitation counseling services for those with polytrauma injuries. Effective rehabilitation counseling services for those with polytrauma injuries. Understand the difference between crisis and disaster. Understand the impact of crisis, disaster, and other trauma-causing events on individual and disabilities. Define the principles of crisis intervention for individuals with disabilities during crisis, disasters, and other traumatic causing events. Understanding the difference between emergency, disaster, and crisis. Understand emergency management systems in community and rehabilitation agencies. These are the objectives that we will be looking at. In risk assessment and safety planning, all is referring to is a process whereby hazards and risk factors that may cause harm are identified, an assessment of the risks associated with the hazard is conducted, and a determination of the most appropriate ways to manage to eliminate the hazard. Risk assessment is vital in behavioral health, which the literature, if you read it, it will describe it as a protocol. What does that mean? It is important that there are steps taken to help determine what exactly the problem is. As counselors, we identify and assess what the risk factors are associated with the hazard and are in order to create a plan to eliminate. So what we're looking at is defining what the issue is so we can create a plan. We have to manage or minimize the hazard at most, so that's what the plan will consist of. This in turn will be the safety plan. We often think of a crisis as a broad scenario of a high school shooting, or maybe our local El Paso massacre that happened a couple of years ago. What was the safety plan? This is a trauma that the individuals who encountered it in real life will have to live with forever. In our field, risk assessment refers to most often towards the goal of reducing suicide and homicide risk. When are risk assessment used? A mental health crisis is any situation in which a person's behavior puts them at risk of hurting themselves or others, and or prevents them from being able to care for themselves, function effectively in the community. They are the most often used during the mental health crisis. For example, you're at work and you notice a coworker banging their head against their desk, crying. He or she is having a mental health crisis. Not only is your coworker clearly not doing something that is normal, but now is inflicting pain in themselves. What you want to do here is develop the safety plan to conduct clear, open-ended questions so that it allows us as rehab counselors to get acquainted with what is going on. What are their thoughts? That's what we're looking at.
So I didn't realize I was muted earlier when I was talking. That's why there was a long pause. I'm sorry about that. I'll just restate what I was mentioning. So if you were listening on that last slide, they mentioned something about the El Paso shooting. So I myself and the person who created this were both from El Paso, and we were not there when the incident happened, but we were in the area when that whole Walmart shooting happened. That's what she's referring to. With that, as you know, in today's world, it's sad to say, but nobody's safe from mass shootings. Nobody's safe from pretty much any sort of trauma. And with that, as a rehab counselor, it's like, well, how do we fit into that role? Well, one way you can look at that is some of your clients may be the ones who were shot. Maybe they were the ones affected by an explosion, or they were directly affected because they saw their loved ones die in front of them. And sometimes that can play a very long-term effect on their health. They end up becoming depression or worse. So as a rehab counselor, for us, it's very important that we understand, because there's even things that are like child trauma and even secondary trauma that happens to family. And those are things that we are, as counselors, need to face today. And I'm sure some of you are aware of that.
Risk assessment for trauma. Risk assessment may also be used to determine the risk factor or the risk for trauma. Trauma is a cognitive, emotional, and physical response to a powerfully charged negative event or series of events in which the individual perceives they or a loved one experience serious psychological, physical, or emotional harm. Take, for example, a divorce. That can cause trauma. PTSD. The assessment typically includes an initial psychiatric triage. This process to determine A, the extent of initial impact of the crisis on the individual, B, the risk of experiencing trauma or re-traumatization, C, the risk of developing post-traumatic stress, PTSD, and or other behavioral health conditions, and lethality of suicide risk. Next, we're looking at assessments. With the assessments, we have two that we look at. We look at the formal and the informal. Formal risk assessment tools.
Oh,
Assessments, we have two that we look at. We look at the formal and the informal. Formal risk assessment tools may also be used to explore, identify, describe, measure, classify, diagnose, and code behavioral health disorders and personal and environmental resources and barriers. Informal observational measures may be used to assess the individual's affective, behavioral, and cognitive functioning. The informal mentioned information in which is used to develop an appropriate treatment plan, and I meant to say an appropriate treatment plan, that may also be used to make referrals to entities such as emergency inpatient hospitalization, outpatient treatment, individual counseling, and many other support groups. For those with a history of mental health crisis, safety plans, or more formally, legal psychiatric advance directives known as PADs, may also be completed by the individual and a professional during the time of psychiatric stabilization to determine a preferred plan for care during the future mental health crisis. So just initially what you want to focus on is the legal psychiatric advance directives known as PADs, because they're the ones who are going to be doing the treatment plan, preferred plan, something that is a plan that's unique for each individual.
I don't think there's too much to say on here because our specialty is, of course, completing and conducting assessments. So the thing is, you just got to understand what role you're playing to determine whether or not that person may need an assessment. So, and usually you find that during your intake. So I'm sure some of you here who are rehab counselors have been already doing that. And you just don't realize that. And according to CRC, it's just they're asking you to put what you already do down into more professional sounding words. So when it comes to the CRC exam, I had a few questions that were related to trauma and how you're supposed to intervene on it. And of course, what I saw was things like, which is priority, what are you looking for, and those kind of questions. With that, of course, you have to understand, what kind of trauma are they dealing with and so forth. So a lot of it is there's a formal where you're using some sort of scale, and then the informal where you're looking at the person's behavior. That's why it's very important. Like my role, I do work in the WIOA for adults. And when I do my initial intake assessments now, I make sure that my clients come in person so I can see who they are and know exactly what it is that they're trying to do, because they may say they want to do X, Y, and Z, but if it looks like they have a problem with their appearance, or if they have a problem with their hygiene or something like that, there may be some potential barriers. Or maybe they do have a disability, and that's something that I got to identify. So that's why when it comes to those assessments, it's very important that we capture as much information as we can. So let's keep moving along here.
Next is polytrauma. Polytrauma is defined as two or more injuries to physical regions or organ systems, one of which may be life-threatening, resulting in physical, cognitive, psychological, or psychosocial impairments and functional disability. Rehabilitational counselors should be competent in facilitating interdisciplinary care given to multiple medical and allied healthcare services for people with polytrauma injuries. Here, specifically, rehabilitation counselors should be a core part of interdisciplinary team that includes physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, mental health providers, and other medical personnel, to name a few. Interdisciplinary competencies require strong responsive communication, understanding of medical and allied health, and knowledge of larger health and behavioral health systems to which the individual is receiving services. This team are essential for a full understanding of the individual's functional limitations corresponding with work, school, any type of accommodations that need to be created or done, not really assessed, but I guess brought to the attention of the employer or even the school. An interdisciplinary approach is much more likely to identify appropriate work-school accommodations as well as to facilitate more work, hardening, and training activities. This type of collaboration may also reduce the length of the vocational rehabilitation process, which is ultimately our goal, to have that quality of life. Now we're going to start a video. Do not focus so much on the I guess the promotion side of the video. Listen to what the public servants have to say. I found it very interesting. They do define and go through a lot of detail of the polytrauma and the way they work there. Stand by and watch. Thank you.
Before I go any further, does anybody have any thoughts, questions, or anything they want to bring up in their experience working with multidisciplinary teams in their role? Maybe they want to share some experience about? I see mics coming on and mics coming off. I don't know what that means.
I didn't know if I should just say no or just be quiet.
No, it's fine. That's what I said. I was gonna call people out on this. So, but I can tell you this much: like, I know, like for me, when I was in active duty, I worked with the multidisciplinary team. Now, I wasn't doing this type of role, but I worked alongside with the medics, X-ray technicians, and all that, and we provide a very multi-functioning approach to patient dealing with some sort of physical trauma or even mental trauma for care. So in the civilian world, you don't get to see that much unless you're either at an inpatient psychiatric center, maybe a hospital setting, or perhaps even doing like, I don't know, private rehab or insurance. So, but I do feel like as far as vocational rehab, we should be incorporated into those multidisciplinary roles, because when the person experiences a trauma and they can't work, that's going to affect their livelihood, especially if they're the breadwinner or the sole income winner for the family. You know, and I'm sure you all are aware of that. So let's go ahead. I'll let you guys watch this video here. I'm gonna go ahead and put.
My name is Pat Rudd. I'm the admissions clinical case manager at the Polytrauma Rehab Facility here in Richmond, Virginia, at the Richmond VA Medical Center. They define polytrauma as someone that has had a traumatic brain injury, as well as injuries to multiple organ systems. And that makes it a little different than your average motorcycle collision or car accident, because you've not only damaged many organs and body parts, but you've also got internal damage from blast injuries, blast wave that goes through the body. So what we do is the active duty service members come into the military treatment facilities, they bring them into the US, and then after they're stable, they then call me and I assist with the transition from the Department of Defense to the VA for acute inpatient rehab.
My name is Patricia Ekem, and I'm the nurse manager for Polytrauma 2B. Here in Polytrauma, we have, like the name said, polytrauma, multiple trauma from injuries. We have from motor vehicle accident to bike accidents, some of them from brain tumors and other, we have those too. This unit is a multidisciplinary approach that we use to take care of the patient. We have physical therapy, occupational therapy, kinesiotherapy, speech therapy. Everybody works together as one big family, like we call the Polytrauma family. And everybody come together to ensure the patient get their therapy needs met. Sometimes they come in not being able to do anything. They come in emerging from consciousness, like with a brain injury, just emerging. They're not able to do anything, but they get up and do things for themselves. The ultimate goal is to get them to their best ability, what they can do, given their injury and all that.
I don't know if you noticed, but in the hallway we have a big bell. And when the patients are discharged, they come down the hall with all their belongings and they're checking out, and the staff gathers and they cheer and ring bells and clap and whoop. And then the patient rings that bell and everybody's so excited. We originally thought we were doing this for the patient, but we realized we were doing it for ourselves. We've shed tears with them, we've cheered with them, and to see them get to the point where it's time to leave, it's so gratifying for every member of the team. So it's a big deal. It keeps us doing what we're doing. Choose VA.
Anybody want to chime in or their thoughts and impressions on that video? I say thanks for the VA for that. So, okay, let's keep on moving.
Hey, Ken, I'm sorry, I was
Yes.
trying to, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just want to just make a comment about the VA and about that multidisciplinary team and how that, from my experience when I go there, because as I mentioned before, we're contracted with them, so I get a chance to kind of observe some of the dynamics that's going on over there, and that team that they have is awesome because it has the peer support, the occupational therapist, the rehab counselor, and someone here probably is familiar with that as well. They got the social worker there. I just thought it was just awesome to have that team there. Now, how effective it is I'm not sure, but I know it's so important to have, like, for example, people coming from Iraqi war, or to say the Persian Gulf or something like that with PTSD or whatnot, to have that type of team there, and that transition. It's funny, I was just talking to a coworker. He told me that he was in charge of that counseling component to when they coming back in to transition from war, to get them stabilized, I guess, and then refer them out. Yeah. So just a thought.
No, I appreciate it. It's good to know that there are some VA facilities that do that. And I really think I wish that many more other facilities can make those kind of accommodations and teams, because it does take a group of people to help somebody get back on their feet. It isn't just a one or two individuals. I mean, yeah, you're gonna have one or two individuals that make that critical impact. But as far as having a whole group of people taking care of that person, that's what really helps them to get their feet off the ground. And where I work at the Workforce Development Center, usually most of my clients, when they come to us for services, they've already been seen by at least 3 or 4 other people. And I'm not talking about like clinical stuff, I'm talking about job readiness. So usually they've talked to a recruiter coming in for services, because I work for a Workforce Development Center. They may see an employment services specialist. They went through eligibility, and by the time they get to me, they've already seen 2 or 3 other people. And then as I'm doing the intake, I'm letting them know that this isn't just me that's going to be doing all this for you. You're going to have a team of people, because you're going to have, if I'm putting them in, like, say, work-based learning environment, and they're going to be doing like let's say a paid internship or something. They're going to be talking with a job developer, a coordinator, and a few other people. And I let them know that's like that. They're not lost on the track there, and at least they're well aware. So I noticed that. So if more agencies can have that multidisciplinary group approach with that, it usually gives a more higher chance of a successful outcome, you can say. But thanks so much
I
for
agree.
sharing, John. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Did anybody else want to chime in or put their thoughts to that or their perspectives? Everybody's like, nope. Okay. All right. Let's keep on going. So this here, it's written down here. You can see this later. I will just put that in the tuning. So the next section that she talks about here is about the effective rehab counseling services, those with polytrauma. So think of it as multiple trauma. So we're talking about physical and physical and behavior. Not, I would say behavior, but physical and psychological trauma.
So when it comes to effective rehabilitation counseling services for people with polytrauma injuries, we, as mentioned before, we as counselors work closely with the interdisciplinary team, which includes a variety of public servants. I think I had mentioned some. Others would consist of orthopedics, psychologists. I know that when I worked alongside ROMP, I was dealing with the actual doctor and a doctor, which was the orthopedic, because I was dealing with amputees. And we had also a PT. So there's a variety of people that assist, and we come together to better suit the needs of our client. Family, especially the caregivers, making sure that you have that connection with them, to obtain the better view of the client's needs and their progress. Rehabilitation counseling should provide family members with local and online caregiving supports and resources that provide options for the best of care. So rehabilitation counselors may offer family interventions such as brain injury family interventions known as BI5. I want to say that's how you pronounce it. The BI5 is a 5-session psychoeducation program designed to increase well-being, life satisfaction, access to services, and enhance family functioning for the person with brain injury in their family. Executive functioning skills are necessary for daily functioning and community participation. Cognitive remediation services typically include exercises and skills needed to restore functioning and assist individuals with developing compensatory and adaptive strategies. So these are just like daily things that they need to know that we can assist with. Self-management support systems. Self-management involves learning and practicing daily life skills needed to increase functioning and participation. Self-management skills to reduce the likelihood of developing a secondary health and behavioral health conditions. For example, nutrition. Self-management support typically involves teaching skills, behaviors designed to increase medication and treatment adherence, making sure that they're taking their medications for one. I will be showing a video soon right now that's pretty interesting.
Sorry about that. They know it's just an extra thing. So with that, I don't think we need to go into too much here, but think about it this in terms of CRC. They could ask you questions like, what's the difference between a crisis and a disaster? Or in a CRC, they may ask, according to the definition of a disaster is X, Y, and Z, or this situation's happening, XYZ situation happening. This is an example of a crisis or a disaster. So keep that in mind. When it comes to the CRC, they just want you to know the defining difference between what's the crisis versus what's the disaster. So these are more like situational questions to think about. Okay. Let's go to the next one.
Here's a video that I hope you all enjoy.
Oop. Got it.
Here's a
okay. Before I go to that one, I'm just gonna talk a little bit. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, let's move this over here. I'm gonna talk a little bit more on this part here. Okay. In CRC, they could ask you about what's all included in the response plan. So for you, if you're not too sure, I would suggest, of course, use a red book or just think about being realistic, every place has to have a response plan. There has to be some sort of exit response, especially for those who have disabilities. Where are the evacuations? Where are the safety gear? I mean, no facility should be operating on some sort of safety plan. And you know that in the federal system, they have it. So with that though, keep in mind for the CRC, they may incorporate, if somebody has a disability in a response plan, what do you do? Or, was that included and stuff like that? So just make sure as you're reading about it that you just grasp that big knowledge. I will tell you this much: crisis and trauma, they talk more about like behavioral trauma, so to speak, and post-secondary trauma and polytrauma. I don't think they talk too much about rehab plans, but again, each version that they come out for the CRC exam can change. So again, read that red book. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and play the next video for you here and mute myself.
Some firefighters and first responders who raced to the burning towers on 9/11 or sifted through the rubble in the aftermath suffer trauma to this day. CBS News Chief Medical Correspondent Dr. John LaPook on a program that's helped nearly 20,000 responders and survivors.
Firefighter Brian Bonsignor spent 6 months working recovery at Ground Zero. His GPS unit marked the exact location of victims' remains.
You would come home at the end of the day and you have the smell of death on you. Your shoes, your pores of your skin, your hair.
Bonsignor developed asthma and PTSD. 9/11 anniversaries trigger those PTSD symptoms.
You become very sharp with people. You become very distant with people. I dealt with it by dissociating myself from it, from TVs, newspaper events. And if you relive it, it just piles on and piles on and piles on and piles on.
Dr. Sandra Lowe directs mental health services for the World Trade Center Health Program at Mount Sinai.
Some individuals are actually having what we call their anniversary reactions earlier than usual. For some people, it's because this anniversary happens to be coming in the context of a pandemic.
So it's a confluence of events.
Yeah, absolutely. Some patients started isolating more during the pandemic and having a really hard time actually mobilizing themselves.
This 20th anniversary, coming on the heels of the pandemic, is even triggering first-time mental health issues.
We had 8 new patients coming in, and all of them needed psychiatric treatment.
For you, the memories are so vivid, but do you think for some others that the memories are fading too quickly and that they don't really
I think
appreciate?
So. And I think that it should be talked about, you know, what they did. They gave their life, not me.
And honoring that sacrifice could be another path to healing. Dr. John LaPook, CBS News, New York.
We all got a little something from that video. So Jessica, I think this is the first time I might be talking to you, or maybe the second time, I don't remember. I'm sorry. But where were you when 9/11 happened?
I was actually in high school when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay.
I'm giving
Yeah.
you the floor to talk.
Yes. I was actually in high school when 9/11 hit. I was a senior in high school.
And what happened on you on that day? What was going on?
On that day, I was actually away, like in this, we would call it like a senior leadership where I'm from. And we was all just learning like the etiquette of eating dinner and everything, you know, like if you go out to a real nice fancy restaurant. And I can remember one of our teachers coming in, you know, and she was like, "Come everybody quick." And we all went into this other room and just immediately started watching the news and, you know, watching what happened. And I was just like in so much shock. Like I couldn't believe like this was happening. I thought like the world was just gonna come to an end, you know, being that young and everything.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and I appreciate you sharing that, because it's very interesting how many of us that were alive when this happened more or less remember that whole day of that incident. You know, like what we were doing, maybe what we were eating, what we were having. But yeah, we remember seeing that all over television. It was being broadcast in the news everywhere. And this is for the rest of the people in the group here. Do you think that maybe that what we experienced might have been some sort of like either like maybe a secondary type of trauma?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would say yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
me too.
Yeah. It's crazy. And so like, so when, let's say for instance, and I appreciate you're putting your thoughts in there. Think about a young child, or think about somebody who's a teenager that experienced trauma as a child. Do you take it at face value and say, oh, well, maybe they might not have that might have happened to them? Or do you take it with all seriousness that maybe something did happen to them when they're young and they remembered it? If we can remember something that happened, what it was it, 2001, 20, over 27 years ago, I'm sure somebody that experienced trauma as that young would also know and remember. Now, what makes it harder is for those that aren't able to speak and experience those secondary traumas too. So I figured I just want to share and chime in on that. In returns of CRC though, in the terms of the actual CRC exam, they might give you some situational assessments or situational questions, say, you know, is this a form of polytrauma or secondary trauma? So it's for you to understand and identify the difference. So thinking about your own self and like what we saw here, memorizing what happened then, that's what you consider like that secondary or that long-term trauma. And for some people, like they said in the video, it still affects them today. So thank you all for chiming in. I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and move forward. So with that, I'm going to move forward into here. So the differences, remember, one of the key things though too in the CRC is understanding the difference between what an emergency and disaster and a crisis is. I believe the book does a really good job of explaining that into details. With that, when I forward you this lecture slide, these slides, you will have some of the information that comes out of the textbook. And I think this is really broken down very specific. Because there are differences between emergency versus disaster versus a crisis. And I'm going to go ahead and play the little voice box here too.
Understand the differences between emergency, disaster, and crisis. So we had already gone over disaster and crisis. Now we're just going to go over emergency. So for emergency, I put the picture of, you know, a car accident. Sometimes it's not as bad. I could become, you know, either or of a disaster or a crisis. But I put a car wreck. It kind of looked like a rollover. Sorry. Disaster, I used a hurricane. Crisis, a death of a loved one. Crisis intervention is short-term care that occurs immediately following a crisis, disaster, or any other trauma-causing event. The primary focus of a crisis intervention is to alleviate the immediate impact of the event on the individual and allow the individual in a crisis to function independently. More specific crisis intervention goals include A. Relieving a crisis symptoms. B. Restoring prior levels of functioning. C. Identifying factors leading to the crisis. D. Identifying and applying remedial measures. E. Connecting current stressors with prior life experiences. F. Developing adaptive coping strategies. And crisis intervention is grounded in 8 principles. A. Immediate intervention is essential because individuals cannot withstand crisis for long periods, and the intervention employed during a peak of crisis is more likely to be accepted. B. Action is required to engage actively guide individuals resolving the crisis, mobilizing essential resources via agencies and support groups. C. Setting limited goals that focus on those related to crisis situations. D. Facilitating hope and the expectation that crisis will be resolved. E. Resolve immediate problems. And it gives emphasis on resolving problems underlying the crisis. G. Protecting self-image to prevent feelings of inadequacy, shame, guilt. And H. Fostering self-reliance through assessing the individual's coping skills and fostering their independence. Additional crisis intervention principles recognized internationally as framework for disaster include promoting a sense of safety, promoting calming, promoting sense of self-efficacy, and community efficacy, promoting connectiveness, and instilling hope. Finally, a detailed comprehensive review of crisis intervention principles based on recommendations from numerous experts panels provided as follows. I will not be going through all these, are too long, but
I'll go ahead and say it since my computer's not quite working right now. She's not gonna go through all of it, but basically this is out of the red book. With that though, you, as you're studying for CRC, make sure you know how these services are worked, what are the needs and stuff for, you know, what are ways to promote sense of safety and stuff like that. So basically just understanding, you know, what these do as far as when you're doing these type of responses, when you're dealing with a crisis, an emergency, or a disaster, ultimately. So I won't go into that much either.
So finally, we come to the last objective, emergency management systems in community and rehabilitation agencies. What we're looking at here is shelters, you know, food pantry services, educating the community, most importantly than anything, educating your client. Rehabilitation counselors must understand the emergency management systems in their communities and within the rehabilitation and allied health organizations. Emergency management systems are typically statewide and are coordinated with local municipalities, counties, and cities. These systems are immediately enacted in the case of a local, county, city, state, or national emergency. Emergency management systems are coordinated plans that outline strategies for communication, the resources needed, the personnel involved, and plans for recovery. Ideally, these systems are developed in collaboration with local communities, entities to ensure that all people, particularly the vulnerable at-risk communities, are protected. I like to mention FEMA. Communication strategies may include media, phone, internet-based alerts, and emergency updates communicated through the government. First responders attend those who are being immediately affected to the emergency. Those are also somebody to think about. You know, they help in evacuating people from their fire in their homes, hurricanes, protecting schools and other entities from an active shooter, etc. First responders may also include trauma response teams and personnel from organizations that provide food, basic resources, shelter for those who are removed from immediate danger or a threat. You know, a state assisted living center is one of them. You know, also it's a shelter that you can go to, and it's here locally. Importantly, organization-specific plans should be developed within the context of the larger community emergency management system to ensure appropriate coordination of actions and resources. An example, again, like I mentioned, was FEMA, whole community model of emergency management that seeks to engage a broad spectrum of community partners in a particular geographical area, including the public, private businesses, nonprofit organizations, to collaborate with local, tribal, state, territorial, and federal government partners in developing a community-driven emergency management system that prevents, protects against, mitigates, responds to, recovers from any type of emergency effectively. So again, the whole community model of emergency management, that is what seeks to engage the broad spectrum with community partners. Keep that in mind. The whole community model is one of the approach by FEMA. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed and learned a little.
So that's the end of the slideshow presentation. With that, these answers here I think are out of the book, but because I don't want to be ever accused of like, oh, well, you're giving away answers, because I don't know where a lot of these come from. We're gonna do a little bit of a brief practice here, but I'm gonna stop recording. With that, any thoughts and questions about what was presented today? No? Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and start recording. And